Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another ChessRabbitt video. This is game number 4 of the Anatoly Karpov the Killer Dragon series. We looked at games where Anatoly Karpov totally demolishes the dragon. And here is game number 4. Like I said, he played 17 games in the Sicilian, winning 15 of them, drawing 2 and losing none. And we're going to be pretty much looking at all the wins that I have in my database. This game was played in 1972. Anatoly Karpov, playing white of course, against Juergen Dueball, playing black. Anatoly Karpov starts the game off, of course, with e4. Can't have a Sicilian without e4. Well, I suppose you could start off with d4. And I guess you could start off with d4, d6, e4, c5, knight f3, and do the Sicilian in transposition like that. But 90% of the Sicilians I've seen all start with e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, and we get to the position that we've been looking at all our games so far. Bishop e3, knight c6, knight f3, securing the e4 square. And also controlling the g4 square here. Bishop g7, fianchetto on the bishop, and preparing to castle. Queen d2, probably preparing to trade off this fianchetto bishop that black has. And we've seen that motif plenty of times in these games so far. Castle, g4, start of the attack and the last book move. Knight takes d4. Already, Dueball is trying to simplify. He also could have played knight b d7, which would have been a nice move here. And that would make way for the this rook here, the a8 rook, to come over to c8. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4. Here, if queen takes d4, then we'd be looking at knight takes g4, queen d3, knight takes e3, queen takes e3, bishop e6, where black gains a pawn and has a slight advantage in this position. So the move, bishop takes d4, Karpov plays. Bishop e6, blocking off the e7 pawn. And Karpov castles queenside, preparing for h4, g4, and preparing for the oncoming pawn storm that will probably be coming up. Queen a5, black is attacking the queen side. So as in all motifs, we have an opposite sides castles. We having the white pieces going up the board with the pawns on the king side. We have black attacking on the queen side. Whoever attacks comes first will be the victorious. Unless they just exchange and peter out, and well, then it'll be a draw. King b1 protecting a2 square. Because as you notice, the knight is also protecting the a2 square along with the king. So the queen and bishop, although they're lining up on the a2 square, white is defending it with his pieces. Rook f c8, a3, rook a b8, g5. Let's step back one move and go d5. If Karpov had to play d5 here, then we'll be looking at queen takes d2, rook takes d2, knight takes d2, bishop takes g7, and knight e3. This was played by Nxd and Kasparov in their World Championship match in 1995. And that game concluded in a draw. Karpov goes g5, pushing the knight away. The knight goes to h5. Pretty predictable in these positions. Knight d5. Queen takes d2. Mate threat on. Well, of course, he's going to take the queen, so that's not much of a mate threat, but it is a mate threat on d1. Queen, rook takes d2, bishop takes d5, e takes d5, a6, protecting the b5 square just in case white wants to put a bishop there and then park his bishop here, or attack the rook, from this angle, or you can come here and attack the rook. So I don't know exactly why a6 was played. I'm not a grandmaster, but that's my thinking. And plus, he's trying to push his pawns down the board so he can play a pawn storm. His called pushes 2-3 minority that he has on the king side. Well, you have to attack the king. I mean, white has a pawn already over the frontier line on the king side, so black has to counterattack. Rook g1, b5, and here we go with the black's counterattack. c3, trying to stop the counterattack and controlling the d4 square, so now his bishop is doubly protected. a5, and black continues with the pawn storm. Bishop a7. That's why the move c3 was so important before. So now he can move his bishop, attack the rook, and once the rook moves, he can bring his bishop to a better square, probably on e3. Rook b7, bishop e3, bishop e5, king a2. Here, interesting move would have been rook g4, knight g7. And white would have a little slight more of a possibility with the rook diff, and he can bring his rook over to the h file, or he can just protect this entire file, entire row, and that way when black pushes, he can have some. And when black pushes, he can have a piece here protecting that row. King a2, rook c7, putting his rooks on the 7th rank and doubling them up once again, making sure they're connected. King b3. Karpov playing a little risky, bringing his king out to the center in front of his pieces, but the king is a useful attacking piece here. He doesn't have a light square bishop to harass his king, so the king is quite safe on the light squares right now. Rook b8, probably preparing to double on the b file. Bishop d3. Here, rook g4 is also possible again with, knight g7. Bishop d3. Knight f4, attacking the pawn, and could quite possibly go after the bishop. Bishop e4, protecting the pawn. f5. Of course, that could be taken en passant, and it is. E takes f6. Rook g4. g5. Rook g1. Knight h3. Rook e1. Bishop f4. And bishop f5. Now this bishop can't really be driven around off of f5, and it's protecting a lot of squares because the knight doesn't have anywhere to go. The knight can't move to f5. The knight can't move to g5, and it can't move to f4 because the pieces are there. It can't move to f2 because it'd be taken by the bishop and the rook, and it can't. So the knight is trapped, and it can't go to g1 because of the rook. So the knight is trapped. So what do? Well, we have to exchange and consolidate. Bishop takes e3, rook takes e3, knight f4, and now the knight has a nice outpost, and now the knight is all of a sudden has places it can go. Well, maybe not this square, and maybe not those squares either, but it has a nice outpost where it can attack some pieces to help out the pieces on black's queen side. King e2. Here, interesting is bishop e6 check, and then king f8, where the position is roughly equal. And as long as the we doesn't have a take here, well, this position wouldn't be so equal. This position would be quite naturally good for white, and we don't want that. So Dueball plays king f8. Karpov plays b4, h6, king b2, and rook e7. Here, instead of rook e7, if Dueball tries to play a takes b4, c takes b4, rook e8, rook takes e8, king takes e8, king b3, and we have an equal position with a little slight advantage for white because of the knight here on f4. But he played rook e7, rook takes e7, king takes e7, king b3. Here, if Karpov could play c4, bishop takes c4, king c3, a takes b4, a takes b4, and rook e8. And this position is equal. But black still has this great knight on f4. Karpov plays king b3, rook a8. If Dueball had played a4 here, then that would be met by queen c2, and the king could come around and try. And since the king side would be locked up, the king would be free to come over here to this side of the board and play. Rook e8, c4. Now some of this analysis we showed you before, so now it would start to take place. A takes b4, a takes b4, b takes c4 check, king takes c4, and now we have a pass pawn on b4 that could march all the way up the board, probably with white's rook protection and protection from the king, could march all the way up the board and save the day. This pawn could be very useful later. King d8, coming back to meet the pawn, just in case it has to. King b5, getting in front of the passed pawn. King e7, rook c2 check, king b7, bishop b7, rook a3, trying to get behind the passed pawn and attacks white's king side with this move, and then come here to attack this move, to attack the h2 pawn also. Rook c6, threatening a check here. Rook b3, rook b6 check. Now what you don't want to do in this position, if you're a Karpov, is go rook takes b6, because that could run into queen c7, where both the bishop and the rook are being double attacked. And that you don't want to do. But if rook takes d5, that should be left alone, or else black would be punished by rook takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop c6 check, king c7, and we pick up the bishop. We pick up the knight, and we're a piece ahead. So queen c7, rook takes f6, rook takes d5 check, king takes a6, king takes d7. Now here, if rook takes d7, then we have b5, rook b3, b6 check, king d7, b7, rook a3 check, king b6, knight d5 check, where it runs into a fork where the knight is checking the king and picking up the rook. King c5, rook a5, rook a5 check, king c4, and the knight can now pick up the rook and black can pick up the rook and be a nice piece up. Rook takes h6, rook b6 check, rook b6, king b6, and black is up a piece here. So what you don't want to do is take this piece with rook b6. So Karpov plays check, king c7, bishop c6, knight takes d5, rook takes b7 check, king c8, rook f7, king d8, rook d7 check, king c8, rook f7 again. Or he could play rook h7, then king d8, which is a slight advantage for white. But we're now going after the h6 pawn here. So rook c7, king d8, king c4, avoiding a perpetual. Knight f4, going back to his defensive posture and his outpost. Rook takes f6, d5 check. This pawn can't be taken because it's protected by the rook. King c5. White's king is getting very, very dangerous because once he gets to this d6 square, then we're looking at a checkmate threat. Once the king gets to the d6 square, then we're looking at a checkmate threat. King e7. So Dueball gets out of that one and attacks the rook. Karpov takes the pawn on h6. Rook c3 check. Here, if Dueball goes knight c e6 check, then king d6, and that is and here white can just escort his passed pawn on up the board. c3, king d6. Here, if Karpov had to play king d4 attacking the rook, then we would run into this sequence: rook c4 check, king e5, knight d3 check, king takes d5, rook takes b4, rook c6 check, king e7, and white has an advantage here because white just has an advantage here. So king b6, rook takes f3, b5, and he's beginning to move this b pawn up the board, and he's becoming more and more dangerous. g4, nice little counterattack. Here, instead of g4, if Dueball had to play rook f3, and black can hope to survive because he's attacking this bishop. The bishop would have to move or take this pawn, and black would have some nice counterplay. Rook h4. Here, king c5 and rook b3 could also be played. Rook h4, he's attacking this pawn. Rook h3, Karpov takes. It would be a mistake to go rook f1 instead of rook f3. If we go rook f1, rook g4, d4. So rook h3, rook takes g4, knight d e2. That was a mistake. Here, rook f3 could have been played to protect the knight and then move the knight later. Knight e2 gives Karpov a very, very big window of opportunity. King c7. Now with this square, as long as this bishop is here on c8, this king is protecting the queenie square. So this black pawn can march right on up the board to d8 and become a queen. Also, if Karpov had to play bishop takes d5, then that would run into knight c3, where Karpov would probably just calmly play this again. Bishop c6, and everything's fine. So Karpov goes king c7, Rook H7. Of course, he's going to have a surprise discovered attack on Black's king. Here, Knight C3 really doesn't improve anything because you run into B6. Rook takes H2, B7, and we're looking at Queen next move. Rook H7, setting up a discovered attack. B6, and Karpov ignores the discovered attack. Here, Bishop takes D5 is worse because that runs into Knight C3, King C6, Rook takes H2. Better is B6, going after the pawn, and now here is all technique. King E6, check, discovered check from the Rook. The King has to go to B8. Knight D4, attacking the Bishop. Rook takes D4. King D6, attacking the Bishop once more. Bishop takes D5. The King can't take the Bishop because it's protected by the Rook. King C5, forking the Rook and the passed pawn. Rook D2, protecting everything, but now the pawn can't be taken. And Rook C2, cutting the King off from getting over here to this side of the board where it would attack this pawn. So once this pawn is protected, he would just march on up the board. So we would probably see something like Rook C2, Rook H5, Bishop F7, and Karpov would just march this H pawn right on up the board and winning the game. So here in this position, Dueball resigns and Karpov wins another game. So ladies and gentlemen, this is ChessRabbitt. Thank you very much for listening to the videos, and we will be back soon with another Karpov Dragon Killer video as well as reviews of my game. And until next time, thank you and have a nice day. ChessRabbitt out.